In today's video, we're taking a look at a couple of teams in the Flyers and the Anaheim Ducks that could be making some pretty significant changes this offseason, and we also have some major injury updates, including guys like Evgeni Malkin making their return. We'll jump into the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. So as I mentioned today, we're taking a look at some trade talk in the offseason here, potentially some big moves for teams like the Flyers as well as the Anaheim Ducks. But first, some injury updates here for some key players coming back there tonight. We have Evgeni Malkin for the Pittsburgh Penguins is back. The Penguins are now in first place. They've been playing very well as of late. Adding big Evgeni Malkin into the lineup, is this going to be another huge boost for this team that's been rolling lately? Tanev should be back soon as well. So they're kind of firing at all cylinders and getting healthy here at the right time. So obviously that is going to be a huge boost here. As I mentioned, we get Tyler Seguin as a game time decision tonight for the Dallas Stars. He's had a long road of recovery, and he is expected that there's a good chance he could play in their next game here tonight. If he doesn't play tonight, he should be in the next one. But everything's indicating right now, at least as I record this, it could be updated here before this hits YouTube, but it's looking like he's going to play tonight. The Dallas Stars are in a situation where they can still make the playoffs, but I think it's going to be a tough road. I think the Predators have an easier schedule along the way here. The Dallas Stars have a tougher schedule, and we'll see what happens. But Tyler Seguin being back, I imagine, considering how long he's been out, I would think that there's a good chance he, may not be fully, at full speed here. This is going to take a little while to kind of get his legs back, timing and all that kind of stuff, and be in actual game shape. But he's been skating for a while, and hopefully everything goes well in his pending return here. Now, we've also seen a guy like Jujhar Khaira, the Edmonton Oilers, is coming back, and that's surprising as well, to be honest. The guy suffered 2 concussions recently and didn't even have a lot of playing time in between here. The latest one from hit from Montreal Canadiens defenseman Alexander Romanov, and the guy really was woozy. Like, you could see Khaira going off the ice. Like, he was in rough shape, and apparently he's good to return on. Because it's a little surprised after back-to-back concussions that there really hasn't been a lot of time in between. I mean, I hope he's okay. I hope that the Oilers aren't rushing him. But that's just surprising he's coming back so quickly considering what he's been through as of late. So as I mentioned here, I want to take a look at a couple of teams that could be making some pretty significant changes this offseason. Let's start with the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, it was discussed a lot about the Flyers here on the latest episode of the 31 Thoughts podcast with Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick. And the Flyers, like I said, they're a team they really discussed about their potential offseason plans. One of the big holes here in this team was the effect that they probably expected, but not to the degree that it was felt, was of Matt Niskanen not coming back. He was a surprise retirement for them this offseason, and he actually played a huge role in stabilizing that blue line and played a lot with Ivan Provorov before, and it really made a major impact. It impacted Provorov, impacted the whole blue line, really threw things out off kilter. They tried replacing him as best they could, but the guys they put there just really didn't get the job done, at least not to the degree that he did. Not to say that they're necessarily bad defensemen or should be cut from the team or anything. Like, I know a guy like Philippe Myers was given a chance at times, and they're just not at that level of play as of right now. So the blue line is one area that you do expect there to be changes for Philadelphia, but we've seen Carter Hart kind of go home early after suffering an injury. He had a season he'd probably rather forget. A lot of it was on him, but a lot of it wasn't. There was a team in front of him at times too. So that blue line in front of him played a huge role in a lot of the lack of success we've seen him have this year. I still think he's a terrific young goaltender and he can bounce back. Obviously, having a good, solid offseason, recovering from his injury, and kind of getting his mind in the right place would probably do a world of good here. But up front, there could be some changes as well. There's been a lot of talk. We could see a big name like a Giroux, a Voracek, a JVR, something to that effect be traded. That's going to be very, very challenging given the fact that those guys all come with a pretty hefty cap hit. Now, of course, JVR especially has more time left on his deal. Giroux's entering the final year of his contract. Be interesting to see what the Flyers captain's future holds. I don't really have any reason to think right now that Giroux would be the one moved. I mean, there's been a lot of models out there thinking that they might leave a guy like JVR open in the expansion draft, which could possibly see him go to Seattle. I mean, you can say what you want about JVR. He certainly has his weaknesses, but the guy can still score, and he still, he can still put up a decent amount of goals. I mean, you could argue whether or not the contract is worth it or not for what you get from him. But still, like he's a bit one-dimensional, but he's a guy that can still help you produce, especially when it comes to, on the power play in front of the net, that type of thing. He's a big body, can be useful at times. But certainly more value, I think, in some of their other forwards, like some younger guys that could be on the move, you have to think former number 2 overall pick Nolan Patrick is certainly a guy that's just, I think, crying for a fresh start and needs to go somewhere else and see what he can do to get his career back on track. He's had his fair share of injuries and migraines and all the things he's been through, missed a lot of time, but even when he has played, he hasn't really produced. Not to the way you expect for that level of a draft pick, at least. So I think he's a prime example of what you think of as guys that need fresh starts this coming offseason. Even a guy like Travis Konecny, you would think he likely is kept around, but he would be a guy with a lot of value if they really want to shake things up. Joel Farabee certainly has a bright future in the NHL, likely, with the Flyers. I don't see them moving Farabee, but they do have some interesting pieces there. You have to think a trade for Shane Gostisbehere is coming sooner than later as well. That's a guy that's been on the trade block, it feels like forever. Even been through waivers earlier, not too close to the NHL trade deadline. So there was no takers, but obviously a team like that that's going to acquire Gostisbehere is going to want something going out to offset it. So I'm not surprised he cleared waivers, but still, he's a guy you expect to get moved. There could be a lot of change within the Flyers organization. This could be one of those pivotal off seasons, like the year that we saw them have a bad year, down year, and then we saw guys like Jeff Carter and Mike Richards get traded. That feels like a long time ago because it was, but I think it could be that type of season where we see 1 or 2 guys off this team get traded because of the value that they have. They really shake things up, not necessarily because they're the guys that they feel are the problems on the team or the guys not producing. They have to trade something of value to get value. I would think a guy like Sean Couturier would be safe, but again, people would be lining up to make a trade for Sean Couturier. He's a big guy. He's a sulky candidate. He's a terrific center iceman, and I think there'd be tons of interest in him, tons of interest in Konecny. Not saying they're going to be traded, but still, they're guys that would generate a lot of interest, and you have to wonder to what level that's going to take to shake things up. But you have to think a new partner for Ivan Provorov should be right near the top of that list. Somebody who can play solid defense and stabilize that blue line. Ideally, somebody who's a bit of a veteran to kind of provide what they lost in Matt Niskanen. That's really what this team needs, and I think it would be near the top of Chuck Fletcher's to-do list. And you have to wonder about the backup goaltending situation. Do they bring back Elliott yet again? Or do they go in a different direction for a new goalie partner to work with Carter Hart here as well? So let me know what your thoughts are, especially when it comes to a blue liner. Who is an ideal partner for Ivan Provorov that actually makes sense, that the Flyers could acquire either in free agency or via trade that would likely be available? Give me your mock trades down below and let me know what else you feel the Flyers are going to do to shake things up after a very disappointing season. Now, as I mentioned, the Anaheim Ducks are another team that was heavily discussed on the 31 Thoughts podcast that came out today with Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick talking about how GM Bob Murray could be in store for some significant moves as well. And you have to think that maybe not going through a full rebuild is something that's on his mind. If he can swing a real big trade and hit a home run for a star player to really change the dynamic of that team, that maybe they could get things turned around and not go deeper into a rebuild here. The last few years, they've been slowly declining. They've been trying to mix in more younger players, more youth, and move out slowly some of the vets that were there a long time, which they've done. But still, they're a ways away, I think, from really going through a full rebuild. They have a solid goalie in John Gibson. They have some decent blue liners that they can build around, and Cam Fowler, who signed longer term, Josh Manson, Hampus Lindholm. Do one of those guys get traded? There's a real possibility they could be included in any kind of deal that to bring in a top player. They still have Captain Ryan Getzlaf there. Silverberg's been hurt. Raquel gone through his tough times, but those are all guys with value that could stick around or they could be moved. The Ducks are also a team that was mentioned on the podcast here that have a lot of interesting young talent. If they were to go after a guy like a Jack Eichel, who's expected that could be available this offseason, they could make a play. They may not be the only team to jump in here. Obviously, we talked before about teams like the Rangers and the LA Kings likely being the top 2 teams who could put together the best packages, and there'd be other teams interested as well. If it becomes public knowledge that Eichel is certainly available, all teams are likely going to be inquiring to some degree because he's a top talent, and players like that don't come available every day. But taking a look at the Anaheim Ducks list of younger players and prospects that could possibly be dangled as trade bait. Looking at their top prospects, a guy like Jamie Drysdale, who projects to be a top pair defenseman. You've got Trevor Zegras, who projects to possibly be a top center iceman. Very talented offensive player. You got other prospects like Jacob Perreault. They got Benoit Olivier Groulx. Young goaltender Lucas Dostal, who's very interesting prospect and projects to be a solid starting goalie as well. any of those guys could possibly be included. I mean, I think Drysdale and Zegras are the main ones they would probably prefer to keep, obviously, but depending on what's coming back, it's something that they could certainly entertain and consider. Of course, they have their picks for this year's draft. They could throw in a first-round pick, which would be a fairly high pick this year. That's certainly another option too. And they have other guys on the team that are still, they're maybe not prospects anymore, but they're still young players that don't have a ton of experience that could go on to another team, take on a bigger role, and really flourish. We're looking at guys like Sam Steele and Max Jones. And, obviously there's Maxime Comtois. I mean, he's had a fair bit of success, but still, there's room for him to grow. I'm sure he would have a fair bit of interest in some teams. You get Isaac Lunderstrom, another younger player. They're all 23 and under. Lunderstrom's only 21. Danton Heinen's an interesting young player. He's still only 25. He's not old either, and he's been discussed in trade talk before. Earlier, there was a rumor between the Canucks and the Ducks where Heinen might have been going to Vancouver for Virtanen. Of course, that never quite materialized, but it was close. Even Ricard Raquel's only 27, and he's a guy that was been mentioned in the rumor mill substantially before as well. And to some degree, there was some talk about Jakob Silfverberg, but I think he's a player that the Ducks kind of preferred to keep, but would have been willing to move for the right price. So, I mean, they have a lot of interesting pieces there that could go. So, I mean, for them to put together a package for Jack Eichel is certainly a real possibility. Another reason to think that it's something Bob Murray will heavily consider doing is he was very much involved in the Patrick Laine trade discussions when Winnipeg was trading Laine. Obviously, they ended up making that deal with the Jackets for Pierre-Luc Dubois, but the Ducks were right in there. They were one of the teams down to the wire trying to figure out a way to acquire the Finnish winger. So clearly, like I said, it makes sense that Murray will consider making that home run type of trade if he can to bring in a star player, and instead of going more into rebuild mode, that they're going to go more into reset mode and try to bounce back and be competitive as early as next season. They have some talent that's obviously ready, some that's already a little bit there, a few tweaks, and the Ducks could become a more competitive team, especially if we go back to the old divisions. That Pacific Division wasn't the most competitive before. They could probably jump ahead of teams like the Sharks and the Coyotes, perhaps. Obviously the LA Kings have a lot of good young players too. They could be a team that they could be vying for, in the standings a little bit more closely. Obviously teams like Colorado, Vegas, etc. They're certainly more, further along, more higher up the standings. They'd be tough for them to compete with. But, either way, the point here is that they could be a team that get back into a playoff mix sooner than later with some minor changes if they want to swing for a big, significant deal and bring in one or two players. So if you look at what's been out there for trades and what's been rumored, there's lots of guys there that they could put together a package for Eichel or another big-time player that could come available. So do you see the Anaheim Ducks making sense for a big Eichel trade this season? If the Sabres pull that trigger, could the Ducks compete with teams like the Kings and the Rangers to get this top center out of the Buffalo organization? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.